There are seasons in life when Taurus feels like they're walking down a long hallway, with no doors opening anywhere in sight. You still wake up on time, still answer a few messages, still do the things that need to get done, as if everything is okay. But somewhere underneath all of that, there's a feeling that's hard to explain. Like you're trying to move forward, but the air around you has become heavy somehow. Every time you try to speed up, life slows down another inch. Plans that once made you feel excited now sit quietly inside your phone, the screen lighting up for a moment, then fading back into the dark. Some nights, you sit alone in a quiet kitchen, hearing nothing except the steady hum of the refrigerator in the background, and wondering why you feel so exhausted, even though you haven't really done anything unbearable. Taurus usually doesn't talk about that part. You're good at enduring things, good at keeping calm even when your mind is full of noise. So people look at you and think you're probably fine. Maybe just a little quieter than before, a little slower, a little harder to reach lately. But maybe only you know how frightening it feels to be stopped in the middle of your own journey. It doesn't feel exactly like failure, and it's not completely losing direction either. It feels more like standing in front of an invisible wall. You can't fully see it, but every time you try to push forward, you feel the exhaustion echoing inside your chest. There are days Taurus tries to keep everything the same, tries to stay busy enough to avoid the silence waiting inside your own head. But then one evening, driving home after a long day, you stop at a red light, and suddenly, you don't want to move when it turns green. You just sit there for another minute, listening to an old song, watching strangers blur past the car window. And for the first time in a long time, you realize your body has been trying to tell you something. Not through words, but through the heaviness resting on your shoulders, through the exhaustion that lingers even after sleeping enough hours, through the way you pick up your phone, only to put it back down because you don't have the energy to answer anyone else. Maybe the thing exhausting Taurus the most was never the pressure coming from the outside world. Maybe it was the fact that you've been trying to stay strong for so long without ever giving yourself permission to soften. You're used to continuing, used to holding yourself together through every difficult season. So when life suddenly slows down, the feeling becomes almost unfamiliar. Like one part of you still wants to run forward, while another part only wants to sit quietly in the dark, take a deep breath, and stop trying so hard for a moment. And maybe somewhere in that space between the two, Taurus begins to realize that not every delay is meant to block your path. Sometimes it's simply the moment a person needs to pause long enough to finally hear themselves again beneath all the noise, especially after spending so much of life surviving through endurance alone. And then, from inside that silence, another door slowly begins to appear. Not loudly, not dramatically. It just quietly opens into a room that Taurus may have been standing in front of for a very long time already. A place where nothing is demanding more from you. No voices asking how fast you're supposed to succeed. No eyes watching to make sure you keep pretending to be strong. Just silence. A very strange kind of silence. The kind that feels unfamiliar to Taurus at first. Because you've spent so many years living in constant reaction to life. Work messages, half-finished plans, expectations nobody ever said out loud. Goals stacked one after another, like a train that never stops long enough to breathe. So when everything suddenly slows down, the first thing you feel isn't relief. It's emptiness. Like stepping out of a place that's been unbearably loud, and suddenly finding yourself standing alone in the middle of the night, your ears still ringing because they haven't adjusted to the quiet yet. There are evenings when Taurus stretches out across the couch, without even turning on the TV in front of them. The phone lights up a few times, then goes dark again. A friend sends a simple message asking how you've been, and somehow it takes you forever just to figure out how to answer. Not because you stopped caring, but because inside of you, everything feels like a room that's been through too many storms back to back. Nothing has settled into place yet. Taurus rarely lets other people see this version of themselves. You're used to appearing steady, the person who always knows what to do next, the one who can handle pressure better than most people. But what people don't always realize is that carrying strength for too long can slowly numb a person. So you keep living, keep moving through your days the way you always have. But then these very small moments begin showing you just how tired you've actually become. Standing in a dark kitchen at midnight, holding a glass of water while your mind goes completely blank. Driving down a familiar road and suddenly wanting to slow down just to watch yellow streetlights reflecting across the pavement after the rain. Something inside Taurus is shifting quietly. Not dramatically, not all at once. You just don't feel the same urge to force yourself to move at full speed anymore. And strangely, sometimes that makes you feel guilty. Because Taurus has spent so much of life measuring self-worth through endurance. Push a little harder. Hold on a little longer. Stay silent a little more. Until one day, the body starts reacting before the heart even understands what's happening. You wake up one morning and your shoulders feel heavy as stone. You sleep through an entire weekend and still feel exhausted afterward. You sit in a room full of people, while your mind quietly searches for somewhere peaceful enough to breathe. Maybe that isn't weakness at all. Maybe it's more like a river that's been flowing too hard for too long, finally reaching a stretch calm enough to stop being pulled so far away from itself. And Taurus, after years of moving forward without ever asking whether they were tired, finally begins learning how to sit beside themselves. Not to fix anything, not to force positivity back into the room, just to be there, quiet for a moment, breathing slower for a moment, and somewhere inside that softened silence, Taurus slowly begins to realize that not every season in life requires immediate movement. Some doors only open when a person becomes still enough to hear the sound of their own footsteps echoing through the deepest parts of themselves. And maybe Taurus is moving through a season exactly like that. A very quiet, in-between space, where everything seems to move slower than it normally does. Not exactly sadness, but not truly peace either. It feels more like sitting inside a train station late at night, after most of the noise has already faded, with only a few yellow lights reflecting against the cold tile floor. You sit there with your jacket still carrying the scent of night air from the city outside, watching strangers quietly pass by, and suddenly feeling like your life is standing in the middle of a transfer just like this. Something old is leaving, but whatever comes next hasn't fully arrived yet. And that space in between sometimes unsettles Taurus more than expected, because you're used to clarity, knowing where you're going, knowing what you're sacrificing yourself for, believing that if you just endure a little longer, eventually things will move forward. But there are seasons when life stops answering so quickly, and slowly, you begin feeling caught between two versions of yourself. One version that became deeply familiar with the old rhythm of living, the old way of loving, the old way of trying so hard, and another version quietly forming underneath all of it, still blurry, like the reflection of someone standing against a car window just before sunrise. So sometimes, Taurus begins feeling strangely disconnected inside places that once felt familiar. A coffee shop you used to love suddenly feels too loud. A normal conversation drains you more than it used to. Some nights, you come home, slowly take off your shoes, and sit quietly at the edge of the bed, without even turning the lights on yet. Not because something dramatic happened, but because inside of you, a very quiet shift is taking place. Like an old house beginning to crack slightly after too many seasons of rain. From the outside, everything still looks intact. But the person living inside that house knows something has changed. Taurus usually isn't very good at explaining emotions during moments like this. You just become quieter, more withdrawn. There are messages you read and leave unanswered. Plans you want to cancel, even though you don't really know how to explain why. Sometimes, you don't even understand what you need anymore. Rest? An answer? Or simply the feeling of being allowed to exist without constantly forcing yourself to stay strong all the time. And then there are those very late nights, when the room is lit only by the soft glow of a lamp beside the wall, and Taurus finally starts hearing the thoughts they spent all day trying to outrun. Questions that no longer revolve around success or speed, but quieter questions. Do I still want to live this way? Have I traveled too far just trying to become the person who always seems okay? When was the last time I truly felt light inside? That kind of silence isn't comfortable, But somehow, it also begins peeling away the exhaustion Taurus has carried for so long that it almost became part of your personality. Like a lake after days of heavy wind, finally reaching one still night calm enough to see all the way to the bottom. And maybe inside that place that feels motionless on the surface, something very deep within Taurus is quietly rearranging itself. Not to return to the old version of who you were, but to prepare for a different rhythm of living, one where peace begins to matter just as much as the things you once chased so hard. Maybe Taurus only truly begins to understand that after the body starts speaking in its own quiet language. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just waking up one morning and realizing you no longer have the energy to keep living at the same pace you once did. You can still push through, still finish everything the way you always have. But somewhere underneath it all, a part of you has already started slowing down before the mind fully catches up to it. Like the clock hanging on the wall still moving forward, but the sound of the second hand no longer feels as sharp as it used to. Taurus often believes rest is something that comes later, after the pressure passes, after life becomes more stable, after finally reaching the thing you've been chasing. But life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes people are asked to pause right in the middle of the journey, not because they're weak, but because something deep inside needs to be rearranged. Like a room that's been filled with too much stuff for too many years. You still live inside it. Still move through the familiar drawers and dusty corners without thinking much about them. Until one day, simply walking across the room starts feeling suffocating. And slowly, Taurus begins to realize, this silence isn't as empty as it first seemed. It feels more like a repair shop open in the middle of the night. Nobody sees what's happening inside. But somewhere in the quiet, old gears are being carefully taken apart. Years of exhaustion are being wiped slowly from the body and the mind. There are evenings when you sit beside the window, listening to rain tap softly against the roof outside, and suddenly realize you've been living in survival mode for far too long. So long that even during rest, your body never fully relaxes. Your shoulders still tense, your breathing still shallow, your mind still preparing for something before anything has even happened yet. As if Taurus became too familiar with living in a constant state of keep going. So at first, this quiet feels uncomfortable, because it forces you to sit face to face with the things that were always drowned out by work, goals, responsibilities, and noise. Feelings that were never fully named, small griefs postponed over and over again. Even the loneliness Taurus hides so carefully beneath that calm exterior. But inside this slowing down, something else quietly begins appearing too. You start paying attention to your body again, the rare relief of turning your phone off early, the peace that comes from driving slowly down an empty street at night, the feeling of sitting in a dark kitchen hearing water simmer softly inside a kettle while something inside you finally softens for a moment. Everything feels very small. So small that the old version of Taurus might have ignored it completely. But sometimes those small moments are exactly what guide a person back to themselves. Not through some dramatic transformation, not through a sudden light breaking open the sky. Just little by little, the nervous system relearning what safety feels like without constantly having to fight for it. And once the silence no longer feels frightening, Taurus begins hearing other things rising from within. Old desires, dreams that once burned intensely, even the things you kept chasing for years simply because you never knew when to stop. Like a mirror covered in steam for so long, finally beginning to reveal the real reflection hidden underneath the blur. And sometimes, the first thing Taurus sees in that reflection isn't a stronger version of themselves. It's simply a person who has been quietly tired for a very long time. Tired of always trying to understand everything. Tired of continuing to move forward even after the heart stopped feeling fully connected to the journey. Tired of holding on to dreams that once meant everything, but now feel strangely empty when you look back at them. There are nights when you reopen old plans inside your phone. Goals that once kept you awake with excitement. Notes written by a version of yourself that feels almost unfamiliar now. And Taurus sits there for a long time, staring at the dim glow of the screen in the dark, quietly wondering, do I even still want this anymore? It sounds like such a simple question, But sometimes a person has to walk through a great deal of exhaustion before they become honest enough to ask it. Because Taurus is deeply loyal to the things they once chose. You don't let go easily. You don't change direction easily, even when your heart quietly left that place a long time ago. So there are journeys you continue simply because you've already invested too much time and too much emotion into them. Relationships held together more by endurance than by connection. Ambitions still being chased, even though the joy disappeared somewhere along the way. And somehow, this silence begins revealing all of it. Not by forcing Taurus to change overnight, but by making it impossible to keep pretending you still feel at home inside things that no longer belong to you. It's like sitting in a completely quiet room and suddenly hearing the smallest ticking sound from the clock hanging on the wall. Feelings once buried beneath a life moving too fast begin echoing more clearly now. A little grief, a little loneliness, even a strange sense of relief when imagining what it might feel like to finally put something down after carrying it for too long. And somewhere inside all that silence, Taurus slowly realizes that other desires are beginning to wake up too. Not loud dreams, not goals built to prove something to the world, just small things that make the heart soften again. A life with more peaceful evenings. Work that doesn't leave the body tense all the time. A relationship where you don't have to constantly hold yourself together just to feel loved. Or maybe something even simpler than that. Just waking up in the morning without carrying heaviness in your chest before the day even begins. Taurus begins understanding that some desires do not arrive as a shout. They arrive quietly. Quiet like the smell of hot tea inside a kitchen before sunrise. Quiet like cool night air drifting through an open window after a long, exhausting day. So quiet that if life had remained too loud, you might never have heard them at all. And maybe the most beautiful part of this pause isn't that Taurus suddenly finds every answer. Maybe it's the fact that for the first time in a very long while, you finally allow yourself to sit beside your own heart without demanding that it stay strong a little longer. Just listening quietly, listening to what still makes you feel alive, what still brings peace into your body, and what may finally be ready to be set down gently. And somewhere deep beneath all of that, a new kind of movement slowly begins. Not fast, not dramatic, just like still water after days of heavy wind, finally beginning to form the smallest ripples again. And strangely enough, Taurus doesn't notice the change right away. It doesn't arrive through some massive breakthrough or a dramatic moment powerful enough to turn life upside down overnight. Everything begins with very small signals. So small that if you were still living inside your old rhythm, you probably would have missed them completely. One morning, for the first time in weeks, you feel the urge to open the window and let sunlight into the room again. An old song you've heard countless times before suddenly softens your heart for a few quiet seconds. Or while driving down the same familiar streets, Taurus unexpectedly notices that the mind feels a little calmer today than usual. Just a little. But enough to feel that something frozen inside you is slowly beginning to thaw. Some changes make no sound at all. They simply shift the atmosphere inside a person without announcing themselves. Like the smell of sunlight returning to a room after a long season of rain. You don't notice it immediately. Until one afternoon, sitting in your usual corner with a cup of coffee, Taurus suddenly realizes the heaviness inside doesn't feel quite as strong anymore. Not because every problem disappeared, but because your heart finally stopped fighting against itself. And then life begins sending strange little moments your way. A short conversation with someone that seemed unimportant at first, but stays in your mind all night long. An old book opening accidentally to the exact page you needed. A friend reaching out after months of silence on the same day Taurus quietly felt exhausted beyond words. None of these moments are dramatic enough to call signs in some mystical sense. They feel more like gentle touches from life itself, as if something is quietly reminding you that the current never truly disappeared. It simply changed direction. Maybe Taurus notices they've started smiling a little more during very ordinary moments. Smiling while cooking alone inside a quiet kitchen. Smiling at a story that wasn't even particularly important. Or simply feeling easier to breathe after stepping outside right after the rain finally stops. Things that once felt too small to notice now become the very things bringing you back toward life again. And slowly, because of that, Taurus begins seeing the world differently too. Places that once felt safe suddenly feel too tight around the heart. Relationships once held on to at any cost now leave you feeling quieter than before. And somehow, the simplest things begin offering a kind of peace you haven't touched in a very long time. Like turning your phone off early one evening and listening to the sound of a fan spinning softly inside a dark room. Or driving slowly through an empty street at night, letting your thoughts drift wherever they need to go, without trying to control every part of them anymore. Taurus slowly begins understanding that life doesn't always change through huge turning points. Sometimes it changes through the way a person learns to feel the smallest moments differently. And maybe the most beautiful part is this. You no longer feel trapped inside that old waiting room anymore. The door ahead may not be fully open yet, but the air already feels different. You begin sensing a quiet movement beneath your feet, like the earth after a long winter slowly warming from underneath, and somewhere inside an ordinary moment. Taurus quietly realizes they are no longer standing still the way they once were. Not because life suddenly became easier, but because inside of you, there's finally enough stillness to move forward in a different way. It's no longer the kind of movement that comes from constantly running just to prove something, and it no longer feels like you have to hold yourself so tightly together just to keep life under control. Maybe Taurus is beginning to understand that maturity is not always about how much pressure a person can survive. Sometimes, it's simply about finally learning how to treat yourself more gently. You still carry the same quiet resilience inside you. You're still not someone who gives up easily. But somewhere after all the silence you've walked through, the way you look at life has started to change. You no longer want to trade your peace for things that leave your heart exhausted. You no longer want to force yourself to appear strong in every single moment. And maybe you're not quite as afraid of slowing down anymore either. Because there are certain roads in life that only reveal the truth of what we're carrying inside once we finally walk them slowly. Life will probably still have difficult days. There may still be nights when Taurus sits alone inside a quiet room, feeling uncertain in familiar ways. But maybe now, you've learned how to sit beside your emotions instead of immediately running from them. Like someone who spent years walking through heavy rain, finally learning how to slow down beneath a rooftop and listen to the sound of water falling without feeling panicked anymore. And maybe, the pauses that once frightened Taurus the most were also the very places quietly protecting the deepest parts of you from getting lost inside all the noise and imbalance of life. Have you ever gone through a season like that too? A time when everything on the outside seemed completely still, while something deep inside you was slowly changing little by little. And if this story happened to touch some quiet corner of your heart tonight, maybe we found each other at exactly the right moment. And if you'd like to stay a while longer for conversations like these, you can always return here again sometime and quietly grow alongside this channel in the nights ahead. It's probably getting late where you are now, and after all the days Taurus spent trying so hard, maybe tonight can simply become a softer place to breathe for a little while. Because sometimes, what a person needs most isn't to move faster, just to feel at peace while continuing forward.